In the middle of the 1850s, the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad planned to route their line through Springdale and establish a labor camp at the village. Residents of Springdale objected so strongly to the proposed camp that the company moved the railroad to another location. Two gentlemen named Crawford and Clark saw the possibilities for development at this location, and toward this goal they purchased 600 acres of property and laid out a unique subdivision for railroad owners and mill operators that were then developing in the Mill Creek Valley. With us today is Mrs. Doreen Gove, a Glendale resident who is quite involved with the Historical Society of Glendale. And she's going to answer some questions about just how Glendale has become a National Historic Community. How did this come about?
Well, the citizens of Glendale, several of them became extremely concerned because the environment around us was changing so much. Where we used to be a total farm, surrounded by farms, we now have industry to the south and a huge tri-county shopping center to the north. And so, because we felt that this was very interesting and unique historically, we thought we would apply to the National Register for a listing.
It's quite a lot of work, wasn't it?
Yes, it took about 30 of us working together to get all the information, because there's a lot of information they need for such a large historic district. And we had to contact the owners of the houses and find all the history that we could about the various structures.
What kind of things did the National Registry want to know?
Well, they needed to know the age and the significance of the various, what we call pivotal structures. A pivotal structure is a particular house or building that would draw in background houses. This is true in a historic district, and we supplied pictures and histories.
And it's Ohio's only historic landmark community, isn't that correct?
Yes, we're very fortunate in becoming a landmark. The National Historic Register listing is something that you can apply for as a group. The landmark designation is only something that the Department of the Interior gives to you.
I see.
It is a landmark designation is of significance to the entire United States, whereas a registry listing may only be significant to the local community or the state.
Area. I see. We're located right now in the Village Square, and we're going to be talking about some of the other buildings here on the square right now. Let's walk this way. Oh, what a nice day. All right, here we are. This is the Willis Dooley building on the Willis Dooley block. Could you tell us who built this and when it was built?
Yes. Mr. Willis and Mr. Dooley built it. Mr. Willis was a coal merchant, and Mr. Dooley was a carpenter and builder of quite a few of the smaller houses in the historic district. They built it in 1880.
After the big fire?
Yeah, the so-called Great Fire in Glendale. Okay. It destroyed this entire side of the square. And it was kind of interesting in that Glendale at that time really didn't have very much fire protection. And so the bucket brigade just didn't do the job of putting out such a tremendous fire. So they called downtown to the city of Cincinnati, and the city of Cincinnati put some of their equipment on a flatbed car, and it came out in the railroad in 18 minutes, which was some record. And it did control the fire as far as the rest of the village was concerned, because the sparks were going up as far as the Presbyterian Church.
But unfortunately, it couldn't save the original buildings that were here on the village square.
Wooden buildings on the side, and it did not save them at all.
I see. So. All right. What were some of the original profiteers in this block?
Well, there's always been a drugstore, as we just passed.
I see. That's Gehrig's now.
There was Gehrig's, but it's been a drugstore of various owners. But it's always been a drugstore. And then there was a bakery. There's been a hardware store. There was a shoe repair shop and a harness shop.
I see. And at this end of the building, there was There was the hardware store? Is that what you said?
Yes, there's a hardware store down here.
I see. Well, let's take a look over at the Iron Horse, the oldest existing building on the square. You can walk over there. All right. So this is the infamous Breaker Tavern.
Yes, this is the oldest, really, building standing on the village square because it didn't get destroyed by the fire. It was called a drover's inn, and I looked up drover in the dictionary, and it said it was a driver of animals. And so apparently the drivers came down with their animals on the way to Cincinnati and stopped here.
I see. Could you tell me a little bit about the Prohibition era and the Breakers Tavern?
Well, it always has been
Let's walk up
a
to the front
saloon
door.
as such, but come Prohibition, in the front, it became a restaurant. But those who knew could go to the back, apparently, and find what they were looking for, and also some slot machines. But the front set a very good table.
I also hear that the hobos, this was one of their favorite visiting spots.
Well, if they were picked up by perhaps the chief of police in Glendale coming out on the box cars, it got to be pretty well known that they set a very good table and they got breakfast here. So they had an arrangement that if one had been a guest here as a hobo, one only could come once a month.
I'll keep that in mind the next time I'm carousing in Glendale. Let's go over to the depot. So this is the railroad depot. And this was pretty much the center of the community for the longest period of time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Now, this is not the original depot that was here in 1855 that was built at that time. That one burned down in about 1879. It was a white wooden sort of steamboat Gothic with gingerbread type structure with a white picket fence around the outside.
This is a little more simple in design, isn't it?
So, well, this is the type of building that was going up in 1870.
It was the center of town because people were coming here to pick up packages and to go to work. Could you tell me about the train schedule for workers and executives?
Well, yes. This certainly was the center of activity here. The Glendalians would arrive down here in their carriages, and they had sort of a pecking order where everybody knew their spot, and that was the spot that their carriage was expected to be. Now, this was not simply social. This was very practical, because if they came home at night or something and it was dark, then they got out and they knew just where to find their carriage. But they had 14 trains a day, commuter trains, went back and forth from here, because this was originally the end of the CH&D.
Cincinnati Hamilton Dayton Railroad line. I see.
They had a turntable right over behind the police station where they pushed the engine around.
So there were trains for the workers at 5:30 in the morning, and there were trains for the middle management types at about 7, and then the execs would head into town about 9 o'clock.
Yes, and that some wag used to call them the works, the clerks, and the shirks.
That's good. I guess I'm one of the works, personally, but I don't get up at 5:30. Let's walk down this way a little bit. Glendale is such a beautiful community. Can you tell me how it kind of all fits together? I noticed that the streets are laid out a little bit differently than a normal
the layout of the
street.
streets as...
This way.
What?
The layout of the streets.
The layout of the streets was done according to R.C. Phillips' plan. They're laid out in a curvilinear pattern according to topography. Now, when this was done in 1851 by R.C. Phillips, this was a most unusual thing. And it's because of our planned community, the curvilinear streets, and the fact that the lots were auctioned off and had restrictions, that we are as far as is known, we are the first planned subdivision community still standing intact as it was planned in the United States.
That's interesting. I don't think we mentioned it yet in our walk around. Wasn't there some kind of monetary restriction or minimum amount of money to be spent on each house?
Yes, they had a restriction. It had to be at least $1,500. Now, a lot of them were more than that. One was at least $8,000, and that is the.
Of course, that was quite a good deal of money in those days.
It certainly went a long way when you look at some of the very substantial houses. These were not palatial mansions these men built. They were what they called extremely substantial houses.
All right. Well, basically, we've covered the square. We've covered the Willis Dooley block and the former Breakers Tavern and the depot. In later times, we'll get to the houses and the different other residences and so forth, the parks that make up the community of Glendale. And I want to thank you very much for doing this with us.
I hope you'll get to see our black squirrels that we have in the park.
We've been looking all over for those black
here.
squirrels. Let's go out and sit on the square.
Let's do.
And that was Glendale Village Square, still the center of business activity in Glendale. Thanks for being with us on this community programming effort by Warner Amex. My name's Greg Fraley. Thanks once again.